Okay guys, let's start talking about behavior and learning, which is going to be a huge part of test 2, so let's get into it. We're mostly going to be talking about associative learning today. Now, learning in general is relatively enduring change and potential behavior that results from experience. So in order for learning to happen, a behavioral change has to occur. Remember, a lot of the stuff in this chapter is based on early behaviorist knowledge. Behaviorists believed that behavior is the only way to report any sort of change in a person. The only thing that matters is behavior and environment. Then we have associative learning. This is when we have Pavlovian or operant conditioning. Now, associative learning is when we learn by making an association between two stimulus events or by a response and its consequence. So, speeding and getting a speeding ticket, response and consequence. That's operant conditioning. Pavlovian conditioning is an association between two stimulus events. For instance, when a company selling beer like Coors Light uses sex appeal to sell a thing of beer. Beer plus sex appeal makes you want to buy it. Pavlovian conditioning, this is learning that takes place when a neutral stimulus is paired, or CS, eventually becomes a CS, is paired with a stimulus, UCS, that already produces a response, UCR, unconditioned response. After conditioning, the organism responds to the neutral stimulus in some way. The response of the CS is called a conditioned response, CR. I'll give you an example. We don't learn to be afraid of thunder, or you don't learn to cringe when you see your parents fighting. That's kind of a loud noises are kind of a unconditioned stimulus. You pair that with a neutral stimulus like a fudge round. You eat fudge rounds while you watch your parents fighting, eventually you might lose your taste for fudge rounds. Associative learning is kind of interesting because it happens all the time. It happens in advertising, it happens in your interpersonal interactions, and it happens when you get sick off a certain type of food. That's classical or Pavlovian conditioning. Those two are the same things. Operant condition is learning an association between one's behavior and its consequence, reinforcement or punishment. If your behavior is followed by a favorable outcome, you'll want to do that behavior again. If your behavior is followed by an unfavorable outcome, you are less likely to do that behavior again. That's known as punishment. We also have the option for template learning. This is when we learn when our brain is at a given state of development. When we were sensitive to a specific type of perceptual experience, like for instance, in the first 6 months to 2 years of life is a really good time to learn about another language. But if you want to learn about, say, social skills, the critical period is before the age of 10. Now, we have unconditioned stimulus, which is the Pavlovian conditioning of stimulus that elicits an unlearned response or reflex. In other words, these are things that we naturally react to. Okay? We naturally feel pain when we're shocked. We naturally don't like the feeling of throwing up. We naturally don't like loud noises. Well, at least we don't when we're kids. And we also don't like bad smells. Certain things we naturally react to. Also, another thing that we naturally react to is food. Tend to react to things stronger if they fit our basic needs. Food is one of the things that hit our basic needs. Unconditional response is basically a natural response. If I see food and I'm hungry, my stomach might growl. That's the unconditional response. Or I might salivate. I might get ready to eat the food. Someone comes up behind me with a pair of cymbals, I might jump. That is an example of an unconditioned response. Please know the difference between those two. Those are essential. Conditioned stimulus, CS. is a stimulus that elicits a response only after being associated with an unconditioned stimulus. Oops. Oopsie. So basically, in the case of little Albert, we talked about little Albert being afraid of a white rat. Now, the white rat didn't do him nothing. Kids aren't normally afraid of little things like white rats and snakes like us adults are. However, you pair that with a loud noise right behind the baby's head, eventually the child will learn to associate the rat with the loud noise. Now, with enough pairings of the rat and the loud noise, the child will eventually form an association. He will be classically conditioned to fear the white rat, because in his view, the white rat is linked to the loud noise. Now, the fact that the rat is paired with a loud noise, the rat becomes it from neutral stimulus to a conditioned stimulus. Conditioned is a fancy word for learned. I know it's weird because when you say you condition your hair, you didn't learn your hair, right? It just feels kind of weird to hear that, but conditioned in this case is another word for learned. Remember what I said about behaviors and being about learning a new language. There's a lot of new terms we gotta learn here. Conditioned response is a reaction to a conditioned stimulus. In other words, if I was conditioned to be afraid of white rats, I get a white rat plopped on my lap, and I scream, that is a conditioned response. Same thing if you take your dog to the vet. The dog's not afraid of the vet the first time he goes to the vet. After the dog gets a shot at the vet, he might smell the vet, see the vet office, and start freaking out, because he associates the vet with the pain of the shot. So the conditioned stimulus would be the vet's office. The conditioned response would be the dog freaking out because he's at the vet's office. Okay, I think I burnt the bridge on that one. Acquisition is the time it takes for, either in Pavlovian conditioning or classical conditioning, learning to associate a conditioned stimulus with an unconditioned stimulus. Learning to associate the rat with the loud noise behind the kid's head. Learning to associate the bell with the food in Pavlov's dog studies. Or learning to associate the beer with the sex appeal in the advertising media. In operant conditioning, this is learning to associate responses with a reinforcer or punisher. Now, for my parents, you guys know that if you stay consistent with your kid, the kid eventually learns to avoid or to associate a behavior with a reinforcer or punisher. So there's a couple things we need to talk about when it comes to acquisition. If you want to stimuli or a response and a consequence to be associated effectively, you need to remember a few things. Now, when it comes to Pavlovian conditioning or classical conditioning, it is the same thing. It takes place more easily when the neutral conditioned stimulus is clearly different from other stimuli. The rat is clearly different from all of the stimuli in the room. The intensity of the UCS unconditioned stimulus will also influence conditioning. The unconditioned stimulus in the little Albert study is the loud noise. Also, you have to compare the two things very frequently. In the case of the little Albert study, you want to make sure the rat signals the loud noise every single time. And the loud noise, it has to be pretty loud, it has to be pretty salient, it has to be very noticeable. Also, the degree to which the CS and UCS are related. You want to make sure that one signals the other. This is known in the big fancy behaviorist words as stimulus contingency. Okay, now we all know about things that we hate to eat, based on either association or food poisoning. For me, it is celery. This is a very sad state of affairs because for the longest time I really loved celery. One time I got sick off of it. Ergo, I can no longer eat the celery. So, John Garcia had studied the first conditioned taste aversion. This is whenever we learn to not like something. If we eat something, it gets us sick, we don't want to eat it anymore because we associate with something we don't like. So oftentimes, if you eat something and then you undergo chemotherapy and throw it up, you may not be likely to want to eat it again. So conditioned taste aversion is a learned aversion to a relatively novel taste or smell that occurs following illness or nausea. Don't want to get sick? Don't avoid eating a whole bunch of food till you spew. That particular type of food, you might not be able to eat it again. This was used oftentimes in like farming techniques and whatnot. You want to stop a coyote from eating your crops or sheep. Well, coyotes would eat the sheep. You would inject one sheep with something that will make the coyote sick. That coyote eats said sheep. That coyote no longer wants to eat any sheep because he associates the taste of sheep with being sick. Let's talk about extinction. Now, in the case of Pavlov's dog study, we talk about how the bell signaled the food, the bell signaled the food, the bell signaled the food. What happens if for a couple, like for about 3 or 4 trials, you ring a bell but present no food to the dog? Would the dog then produce the conditioned response, aka salivation? Quite possibly no after a certain number of trials. That means extinction would have occurred. Extinction is, in Pavlovian or classical conditioning, the process by which a conditioned response is eliminated through repeated presentation of the conditioned stimulus without the unconditioned stimulus. Remember I said about Pavlov's dog study. You ring a bell, the bell is supposed to be a neutral stimulus, you present the food. The dog doesn't have to learn to react to food. It's an unconditioned stimulus, it's a natural stimulus. Present the dog with the food. The dog drools, eats the food. You ring a bell, present the food. Ring a bell, present the food. The dog learns to associate the bell with the food. The dog drools when he hears the bell. The bell becomes a conditioned stimulus. He learns to react to the bell. The drooling is a conditioned response. You present the dog with the food. Well, the dog's going to salivate. Now, eventually, if you present the dog with the bell, but no food, over a while, after a couple tries, the dog will stop salivating at the bell. Now, then there's operant conditioning. Extinction can occur in operant conditioning too. This is when you see this a lot in kind of like split parent households. What will happen is what happens is like if a child knows he can get away doing something at one parent's house but not at some other parent's house, the child may not always learn the behavior. The child could be very well trained in one home, learning, okay, well, if I eat this, or I can't have a second piece of pie after dinner, but he goes to his dad's house and he'll have whatever the heck he wants. It'll be hard to teach the kid no after that. That's very difficult in split parent households. So whoever can do that, thumbs up to you. Let's talk about the difference between generalization and discrimination. If you undergo stimulus generalization, that means you learn to respond to something that's similar to the thing that you will learn to be afraid of or like or whatever. In the case of the Little Albert study, Little Albert was conditioned or learned to be afraid of a white rat by pairing it with a loud noise. Now, he didn't just learn to be afraid of the white rat. There's another part of the story I didn't tell you. They presented Little Albert with a white face mask, like a little Santa Claus mask, and a white rabbit. The kid cried for each of them. Now this kid wasn't just a crybaby. He couldn't tell the difference in his head. There's no white rabbit, white mask, or anything. He'd just keep crying when he saw them. Generalization is the process by which an organism responds to stimuli that are similar to the conditioned stimulus without undergoing conditioning to each similar stimulus. Discrimination is the process by which responses are restricted to specific stimuli. Now, when it comes to things like conditioned taste aversion, if you're like me and you learn to hate celery, you don't want to hate all green foods, right? So it just happens with the celery. Discrimination is whenever you just learn to react or form the association with the one signal, the one pair of signals. In this case, you want little Albert, hopefully, to be afraid of only the white mask. Or only the white rat. However, in this case, he indicated generalization, which means he reacted to everything else similar to that. He didn't really react to that one specific stimulus. Here's the case of second-order conditioning. This is a learned association between two conditioned stimuli that can occur following conditioning to conditioned stimuli 1 and unconditioned stimulus. Let's say you get a rat to start pressing a button, or he freaks out when he hears a bell because it signals a shock. What if a tone signals a bell? Well, the rat might freak out. The tone in this case would signal the bell would be the CS2. The tone would be the CS2 here. Okay, the bell would be the CS1. The rat would learn to associate the bell with the shock first. Then you learn to associate the tone with the bell, so that would be your CS2. Now, talking about operant conditioning. You guys, I can go all day when it comes to operant conditioning. This is one of my favorite topics. The law of effect. It was originally proposed by Edward Thorndike in the Foundation for Operant Conditioning Theory. Basically, he found this by putting a whole bunch of cats in a box. He put the cats in the box, and he learned from putting the cats in the box. Now, for any of you guys who know about what it's like to put a cat in a box, you know they probably will go in there willingly. But this particular cat wanted to get out, so he had to press a certain types of buttons in the box to get him out of that box. He learned that behaviors followed by reinforcement would strengthen a behavior, while behavior followed by punishment would then be weakened. Give you an example. If you're talking to a hot girl, guys or girls, whatever, you're talking to a hot girl and the person just completely ignores you. Well, that's not exactly strengthening or reinforcing your behavior, right? So you may not want to talk to that person anymore. You might walk away. Let's say you're talking to someone who's really interested, who seems to, take an interest in what you're saying and seems fascinating. You're probably going to go talk to that person next time you see him at a party. Because that behavior, you talking to the person, was reinforced by the person's attention. You see this a lot in dating. You see this a lot in reality TV shows, whatever. Now, you can measure operant behavior. One of the cool things about applied behavioral analysis is that you can actually track the progress of a behavior. So, in a cumulative record, you talk about time increments. Let's say you're doing this sort of treatment to get a person to increase their verbal manding skills. You want a child to basically say that he wants something. You want to hold a Skittle in front of the kid's face and say the word Skittle so he gets the Skittle. You want to see how long it takes for the kid to do that one thing perfectly. So you measure how many times he does this in a day. Every day. This is known as a cumulative record. It's kind of like a calendar or progress chart. So it's kind of like a graph. As response rate increases, the slope of the record increases. In behavioral analysis, we call asking for something manding. That's our word of the day today, you guys. Now, if you want someone to respond to something in terms of behavioral analysis, you have to use something known as a discriminative stimulus. Now, you have to make sure the person's aware, if you do this, you get a treat or something. So discriminative stimulus, this is a stimulus that controls a response by signaling the availability of reinforcement. Oh look, you want this? You hold up the Skittle and say, hey Timmy, what are the days in the week? The kid labels them off, gets the Skittle. Okay guys, here's where it gets a little bit complicated. There's a difference between reinforcement and punishment. I'm going to break this down real slow. Not because, just because people tend to get this confused. Even if I teach this absolutely perfectly, people sometimes still get this confused, so I have to make sure I'm clear. Reinforcement means when you do a procedure, when an event following a specific response increases the probability that a response will occur. You get someone picking on you in class, and you give in to him. That person is then reinforced. I've seen it with my students, I've seen it with anyone. You want your kid to do well in school, give him a Skittle when he does something good, or give him praise. Praise works awesome with kids, in my experience. It works awesome with my students too. You have positive reinforcement. This is any stimulus presented after a response that increases the probability of that response. Now, when I say positive, you guys, pay attention to the language here. Positive means adding something to the situation, anything that's presented. Getting extra time on your iPod, positive reinforcement. Getting a hug from your significant other, positive reinforcement. Getting a free cup of coffee when you buy 10 cups of coffee at a coffee house, positive reinforcement. All these things are things adding to the situation that increases your likelihood of doing something. Negative reinforcement is slightly more complicated to explain. However, we are very much guided by negative reinforcement in our lives, y'all. It is scary how much we are guided by negative reinforcement. This is an operant conditioning, any stimulus that increases the probability of a response through its removal. We humans do all sorts of crazy stuff to avoid doing stuff we don't like. If a telemarketer is going to call us, we do all sorts of things to avoid our phone. Okay? We're creatures that are very skilled in avoiding things. I mean, procrastination is a really strong negative reinforcement. You ever hit a snooze on your alarm in the morning? That feels pretty darn good, don't it? Well, in this case, not hearing the alarm anymore feels pretty darn good. Giving yourself an excuse to not do something, not keep an appointment, miss a class. I dare you to not notice that little rush you feel inside your head. It feels good. That means you're more likely to do it again. Procrastination, you guys, is a really big... It's very addictive. Let's just say. So let's give you an example. Last summer, or 2 summers ago, I had this guy that I actually knew personally. He was teaching a music class. However, he would teach the class very loudly, to the point where I had difficulty teaching my lectures. I tried to ask him not to do it. He said no. I said, okay, I will make fun of you then. And I did. I'm doing so right now. What he did was he would play his music loud. He told me to bang on the wall if it gets too loud. I'm like, no. Because banging on the wall is it's a negative reinforcement technique. Something I don't like is going on. I bang on the wall. It stops. Well, what's going to happen next time there's a lot of noise and I'm in the other side of the wall? I'm probably going to bang on the wall. So, people responding to my banging on the wall behavior means determination on the loud noise. The noise is no longer loud. So hopefully that thing goes away. My behavior is negatively reinforced because the thing I don't like goes away. Sometimes, if you have kids, you might say, okay, well, if you do all your homework, you can get all A's. You don't have to do chores this week. Things like that. Now, there's 2 types of negative reinforcement techniques. There's escape and avoidance. There's a basic difference between the two. Escape is how you get rid get out of something that you're already doing. Avoidance is how you're reinforced to do something to get rid of, to stop something from happening. So escape conditioning. This is when you learn to, when an organism performs a response that will terminate an aversive stimulus, aka banging on the wall, to stop the noise. And if you guys live in an apartment building, you know what I'm talking about. I happen to live in an apartment building right now. But thank God my neighbors are not noisy. And if they get noisy, I won't bang on the wall, I'll go over there and I'll chat with them. Because they're reasonable folk. But banging on a wall is a form of escape conditioning. You're trying to get out of something that's already happening. Trying to get out of class by saying I need to go to the bathroom. And there's avoidance conditioning. In operant conditioning, the learning of a response to discriminative stimulus that allows an organism to avoid exposure to an aversive stimulus. Now, in avoidance conditioning, you guys, you're trying to stop something from happening. So let's say, check on the news, whether or not it's raining. Because, you know, it's hurricane season. You guys were all worried about getting wet. Okay. In this case, you learn a response to discriminative stimulus that allows you to avoid exposure to an aversive stimulus. Some of us don't like getting rained on. That would be considered an aversive stimulus. Aversive is just a fancy word for something we don't like. So I don't want to get rained on. I carry an umbrella around. So my behavior, which is carrying the umbrella, is a behavior that is negatively reinforced by me not getting wet. So I'm avoiding getting wet, avoidance conditioning, I'm avoiding getting wet by carrying an umbrella. Now, there's two types of reinforcers, primary and conditioned. Now, primary reinforcers are things that we need to survive, hunger, thirst, or sleep. If I know I want to avoid being sleep deprived, I won't get all my work done ahead of time. Now, these are biologically based drives. These are things that we need to survive. If I get something, I do something really good and I get a Skittle, I'm like, oh my God, that feels so awesome. My gosh. It's probably going to reinforce me in a way that's stronger. Now, a conditioned reinforcer, on the other hand, is something that takes on reinforcing properties after being associated with a primary reinforcer. So, words of praise are only good depending upon who it's coming from, right? Good grades, well, grades are associated with academic success. Money. Money is only useful by what you can buy it with it. When I was little, I'd get like $4 in allowance money. I bet you kids' allowance monies have increased since then. Because $4 now won't buy you a hamburger. Whereas $4 back then could buy me a whole bunch of treats at, you know, when we did treat day at school. So, basically, money is only, worth what we can buy with it. And that's why it's a conditioned reinforcer. It cannot meet our needs on its own. So please understand the difference between primary reinforcers and conditioned reinforcers. Primary reinforcers are things like food, water, things like that. Secondary reinforcers are words of praise, good grades, and money. Things that we don't really need to survive, but are still useful. Okay guys, I'm going to stop the video right now and upload it. And I'm going to talk about conditioned and partial reinforcement next time. Alright, have a good day guys. Bye.